Wow, 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 wow. Okay, I saw some other guy do this a couple of weeks ago and I felt inspired, so here we go. And just be aware that my biases are gonna be on full display, so try to keep your nerd rage at bay. And we got a tier at the bottom here for stuff I'm not really familiar with. Even a cool, smart guy like me doesn't know everything, believe it or not. We'll go in order by company, so I can categorize my ideas better. So, starting with the Atari systems, we got the Atari 2600. Certainly groundbreaking stuff, all those enduring classics like Space Invaders and Pong and Adventure and what have you. It really set the medium forward. I would put the 2600/VCS in C tier, and everything else in the Atari lineup was just total dog water, unfortunately. So I believe that's the 7200 or the 7800, excuse me. We're going in order, excuse me. 5200. Yeah, that one was very much the PS3 of its day. That should tell you pretty much everything you need to know. And not to mention those controllers would just fall apart. 5200 goes there, and 7800. Compared to the NES, it wasn't there. Could not compete. Not to mention it had that awful sound chip in it. And then the Jaguar, similar story, they just didn't know what they were doing. Okay, next we'll move on to Nintendo stuff. First up we got the NES, revolutionary stuff. When you look at games that came out before the NES and then what came out after, it really drives the point home of just how big of a deal the NES was back then. I mean, it's kind of hard to tell by modern standards, but all the stuff that came out before the NES just seems so sucky in comparison. The NES was a godsend. And not to mention, they kept making new stuff well after the SNES had come out. And those later NES games that came out from like 91 to 93, those were the most proficient ones. The ones that pushed the hardware as far as it can go. The NES just kept getting better and better. It just gets better and better. So yeah, S tier is going to be reserved for consoles where when you ask yourself, could it have been any better? And if the answer to that question is no, then it goes in S tier. Next up we got the Super Nintendo, a similar story, as good as a 16-bit system could get. And not to mention they kept pushing it further. A good 3 years into the life cycle they figured out pre-rendered graphics and with Donkey Kong Country, and suddenly a whole new world was opened up. And then after that they had the Super FX chips. Just on and on and on. The SNES was unstoppable. I also like the aesthetic design of it, the purple on gray. I know that's a controversial decision, but I like the American style of the console much better than the European style where it just looks like a dumpy VHS player. So yeah, original Game Boy. You know, all the Nintendo handhelds kinda can go in the same spot where they had interesting things to show, but they were a bit hard to look at. Do they have one for the Game Boy Color? I guess they lumped that in with the original Game Boy. Yeah, the lack of backlight was a problem at times. I guess I'm starting to go out of order. God help us all. Do I want to just stick to Nintendo handhelds or keep doing the consoles in order? Yeah, the DS had lots of cool games coming out for it. Pretty much all the time. Unintentional. The 3DS, where is it? Kind of felt like the DS's unsuccessful cousin, where it never quite felt like it got there. It really struggled at launch, and some of the games kind of felt half-baked here and there. Like, there was that Paper Mario that Chugga Conroy didn't like, and feels like Nintendo's quality control was starting to slip at some point in the mid-2010s as far as their first-party games were concerned. and that trend continued to this day. So, controversial opinion, but the 3DS is going in D tier. Where is the N64? N64 is kind of a mixed bag, because it only had a few games in its library relative to other consoles. 296 games altogether in the North American library, and even then, the third-party stuff was kind of crummy. It seemed like, the third-party stuff was mostly just racing games and sports games, and so if you're not into either of those, there isn't a whole lot to offer, but the first-party games were so good that it kind of makes up for it in a sense. All those enduring classics that we're still talking about to this day. Despite everything, I'd say the N64 has earned a spot in A tier. The GameCube, I had one growing up, and the release schedule was a bit dry, to say the least. At one point, the first-party releases the gaming releases in general got so slow that Nintendo Power's Game of the Month was Madagascar the Game. But overall, the first-party stuff was still good. Much like the N64, the first-party stuff was good enough to overshadow all of the other problems that it had. That earns a spot in A tier. The Nintendo Wii. Now, just getting into my rules a bit further, I don't judge these based on homebrew or any kind of backwards compatibility, as even if a system did have good backwards compat, that just means that a different system's games were really good, not this system's games necessarily. We want to judge these things on their own merits. That being said, it feels like a lot of the games on the Wii were just kind of broken with the crummy motion controls. There were a few good ones here and there, but overall it just didn't do much for me. Let's see. You got the Switch. Well, the third-party support for a Nintendo console is probably the best it's been. Since the SNES era, the third parties are finally back. You got all your Dragon Quests and your Mega Mans and your Final Fantasies and such. But then, much like the 3DS, there's the added issue of the quality controls kind of slipping with the first-party games. You got like that Mario Party nobody liked, or the new Mario Strikers, and it all feels kind of half-baked. And you got the Joy-Con drift as well. That certainly wouldn't have happened when Iwata was president. So yeah, I'm going to put that one in B tier. I believe that... Oh, we forgot the Game & Watch. I guess Game & Watch goes in tier. Same goes for the Wii U. I never really had that one. There's not much to judge it on. You know what? Actually, I think we can pretty confidently put the Wii U over there. Next, let's do the Sega consoles. We got the Sega Master System. I'd say it was perfectly adequate as far as what an 8-bit system should be. You had your Monster World and your Alex Kidd and your Phantasy Star. But of course, this is coming from the perspective of someone who didn't have one back in the day, from the perspective of someone who just played the entire library many years later. I've read that for people who actually had the thing back in the day, the release schedule was quite slow and dry, and lots of good stuff never came out in America, but again, as far as 8-bit consoles are concerned, perfectly average. What is this? I don't see the Sega Genesis on here. Oh, there it is. So yeah, the Sega Genesis represents an important milestone in the history of gaming, because it was the first game console to be cool, so to speak, with all of that edgy marketing and such. And that was definitely a first. You have to factor in the cultural impact. But that being said, the games were usually solid, but then at the same time a lot of them kind of felt clunky and underdeveloped compared to what was going on the SNES, its main competitor. But overall, good stuff. We've got the Sega Saturn. I'm going to be honest, it's really hard to find the good Sega Saturn games. I mean, they are there, but most of them only had like a print run of like 30,000 copies and only came out in Japan. Games like Tri-Rush Deppy or Ninpen Manmaru, and the good stuff, it's buried very deeply, and objectively, it's just not a good system. So that's gonna go in D tier, sadly. The Dreamcast, my first instinct is to put it in S tier because of all that cool, innovative stuff that it did. But the criteria that I said earlier was, can it be better? And the Dreamcast could have been better, honestly, because, well, the big problem was that it left too soon. If they had stuck in the console race for long enough, we could have had even more fantastical Dreamcast games. We were going to have a new Nights into Dreams, and there was that Toe Jam and Earl reboot for the original Xbox. That was going to be a Dreamcast game originally, and many others would have come out, presumably, so the fact that it left early kind of bumps it down a spot, and we're going to put it in A tier. Don't know a whole lot about the Game Gear. The Mega SD, or was it Mega SG? Yeah, Mega SG has support for Game Gear games, so I played most of them, and none of them really stood out, to be honest, but I'm not informed enough to make a decision. Okay, next we'll do Sony consoles. PS1, as far as a console from 1995 could go, it really couldn't get any better than it could have. It was super developer friendly, so it had ports of pretty much every game from every system, and the library just went on forever and ever and ever, and there was like thousands of games, and not to mention the budgets back then were still relatively small, so it didn't take much to make a game, so companies could crank out games fairly quickly while still having the advantages of games being 3D and advanced, and it really hit the spot, you know, lightning in a bottle. PS1 goes in S tier. PS2, a bit sacrilegious, but I don't like it as much as the PS1, just with the changing of the industry. Budgets got bigger, and there was a little less room for small and medium-sized games, and there aren't as many hidden gems as the PS1 had, unfortunately. But still lots of fun stuff overall. That deserves that spot. PS3, this may be a bit shocking to hear, but I've never played a PS3. Somehow I just never came across it. PS3 has no game, as they say. Her. Help if these pictures weren't all cut off. Oh wait, there it is. No, that's shit. I can't even tell what that is. It's cut off. I think that's an early PS4 model. Yeah, as far as the PS4 goes, I mean, it did what it was supposed to do, but honestly, it never really appealed to me. I mean, it's not the PS4's fault. It delivered all the hottest mid-2010s games, and it just so happens that mid-2010s games all kind of stunk. Seems like every game released from 2013 to maybe like 2017 was just kind of bland and forgettable. That's gonna earn some dislikes on this video. Again, it didn't do anything wrong, but it just didn't have much for me, honestly. PS5, I mean, it barely even has any games, even after all these years. I mean, what, there's Returnal, there's the Dark Souls reboot. I did like Returnal, so I'm gonna give it the benefit of the doubt and assume that better things are coming in the future. Back to the future. Pardon me. The PSP and the PS Vita. Don't know a whole lot about either of those. We got the Xbox. I played the original Xbox at my neighbor's house back in the day. Don't know a whole lot about it, but I'm gonna give it the benefit of the doubt here and assume that it had everything, well, assume that it had 75% of what the PS2 had, plus some fun exclusives of its own. That's enough to earn a spot in A tier. All the 6th gen stuff gets a spot in A tier. It was a fun time. Xbox 360, yeah, it was alright, I guess. There is a very clear retro... There you go. There's a very clear retro bias in this tier list. Xbox One, never played that one, and neither did anybody else. Oh, wait, that's not, shit. Did they put the Xbox 360 twice? What the hell's going on here? Okay, that's a little weird. Anyway, Series X is kind of a weird thing to compliment it on, but I like the way the storefront is organized. It's very easy to find interesting small and medium things. Games like Death's Door, or Creature in the Well, or Ginger, or whatever it was called. Compared to the PS5 storefront, the PS5 just puts all the big expensive stuff up front, and it's actually quite difficult to find the hidden gems, so that's a plus for the Series X, I guess. And once again, I don't grade based on homebrew or backwards compatibility, so I guess that's enough to warrant C tier. Let's see, Turbo Express. Not overly informed on that one. I think it's just a portable TurboGrafx 16, but again, I've never played it. Neo Geo, trying to have an entire system that's just fighting games. Obviously, that's not a winning formula. Not overly informed on the Magnavox Odyssey. I'm going to skip ahead to the TurboGrafx 16 because I got stuff to say about that. Yeah, the TurboGrafx 16 was good fun as far as a system that's both an 8-bit and a 16-bit system. It's really about as far as you can go with that concept. It didn't really push gaming forward necessarily, but just iterated on what was already there and had lots of very polished games from the established genres of the day. Lots of good shmups and platformers and fighting games and what have you. Overall, the TurboGrafx 16 was good fun. Not overly informed on the ColecoVision. I played a few Neo Geo Pocket Color games on that compilation they had on Switch. They were alright, I guess. There's the N-Gage. It was a cell phone and it was a game system, and people joked that it looked like a taco, and it had that weird aspect ratio with its screen. It's a neat idea, but it just didn't quite work. And there you go. We're done. Go home.